I have a little, discussion about Dr. David Duke. Now, a lot of people don't like him or trust him because he apparently was a member of the KKK at one time. I was pretty leery of them too until I started listening to what he had to say. Now, there's a lot that can be said about the Ku Klux Klan. Supposedly, there are good branches of the Ku Klux Klan. I personally don't believe that. But I think it's probably like the Masons and the Shriners and the Moose and the Elk and all these other little secret society type organizations. A lot of decent, well-meaning people are duped into believing that these are all benevolent organizations. And some of these, like the Masons and the Shriners, and they do charitable work and stuff like this. And I think the same thing's been done with the Klan. There's a lot of people, especially at the lower level, I think that at least in the past, I believe the Klan was a good thing. But the Klan isn't good, and its true allegiance, it's the same thing as these other organizations. Their god is Lucifer. If you get it, the Klan claims to be a Christian organization. It's not. Its true god is Lucifer, and you find that out when you get into the very high degrees. And it's all the same thing. David Duke has been out of it for years. And there's no question that the Klan was involved with a lot of its high members have been arrested for corruption, and these I don't believe were trumped up charges. I believe they were genuine charges. No doubt the Klan has been involved, or at least certain aspects have been involved with extreme violence against a lot of innocent people. Some of them maybe weren't innocent, but a lot of them were. So I don't advocate the Klan at all. And I don't think he does anymore. I think he's been out of it for years, but a lot of people hold it against him. But I've never heard David Duke say anything negative about any race, religion, creed, or culture, except for one group that you can't mention or talk about on YouTube, or you get your channel shut down. Now, another thing that, most of everything he says is positive, from what I've seen. He does expose some of the things of this evil group. He's got a little bit of money and power and some connections, so he can get away with more than I can. He's had his channel shut down, but he got put back on, which I wasn't able to do. Another thing that David Duke talks about, as he talks about that white people should be proud of their race, and white European people of white European ancestry should be proud of their race and culture. And he points out that it's kind of like a double standards. It's like everyone else can be proud of their race and their culture, and that's considered to be okay. I mean, blacks can consider themselves, can be proud of their race and their culture, and there's organizations to that effect, and there's been movies and TV shows to that effect, and nobody questions it. I mean, there might be a few rednecks out there that don't like it, but most people accept that as being okay. And the same thing, Native Americans, they can be proud of their culture and their religion, and can say so openly. And the Chinese, or French, or the Japanese, and Asians. Most anyone can be proud of their race, religion, their culture, but white Europeans, if there's any attempt for them to claim to be proud of their culture, their heritage, it's considered racism and hate-mongering. Now, there is a lot of racism and hate-mongering on YouTube that doesn't get censored, but I've seen people putting up videos that all they're doing is saying white people should be proud of their culture, and they've been censored for hate speech. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone else can be proud of their culture and their heritage, but white people can't be. Doesn't make any sense. And it's just like, there's a tremendous amount of racism towards white people, and David Duke points that out. And it's like, that's okay. It's like, it's okay. You can go, your history teacher can like my daughter was taking history, and she got really disgusted with it. And she said, all they did is talk about how evil and horrible the white people were to the Indians. It really kind of ticked her off. And see, that's the thing. Now, if you were to, anyone was to go and say that, all black people are criminals or all Indians were drunks, that would be considered hate speech and racism. But if you can say all white people were involved with the suppression of the blacks or the Indians, that's not racism. The fact is, it was only a certain select group of white people who were involved with the slave trade of the blacks. It was only a certain select group of whites who were involved with the genocide of the Indians. But there's also a deliberate intentional plan to blame all white people for that. And that's racism. If you blame the whole culture for the actions of a few of anything else, that would be considered racism. But if you do it against whites, it's not considered racism. Can't talk about this on YouTube, but there's a certain group of people that were involved, who ran the slave trade, a very high percentage of these people. You can't say who these people are outwardly, or they'll shut your channel down. But they only make up 2% of the population, but 75% of them were slave owners. Or 75% of slave owners were of this certain group of people. And it just so happens that this certain group of people got kicked out of Spain in 1492, which just happened to be the same year that Columbus discovered America, who supposedly was Catholic and not a member of this certain group of people that you can't mention. And it just so happens that that's about when they started exterminating the Caribbean Indians, or Caribbean natives, and started stealing everything of value, of gold and silver, whatever, in the Caribbean, and started turning the Caribbean into slave colonies. And it looked like the same plan was for the mainland eventually. One of the reasons that this group of people that can't be mentioned were kicked out of Spain and a lot of other countries was allegedly, I have to say allegedly, ritually torturing and murdering children, among a lot of other crimes, supposedly. I have to say supposedly. This certain group of people that can't be mentioned that were kicked out of Spain, a lot of them went to Portugal, and a few years later they were kicked out of Portugal, which happened to be the same time, coincidentally, of course, that certain Portuguese started landing in China and started the opium trade. A lot of these same families also were involved with a lot of other stuff, including the slave trade. A lot of them were involved with pirates, which later became the pirates, which is glorified in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean. And the pirates are also the ancestors of Skull and Bones. It's not a coincidence that the pirate flag is the same symbol that Skull and Bones uses. One of the more obvious, what you might call satanic or Luciferian type groups. The Masons and others, it's not so obvious, but Skull and Bones is pretty obvious that this is a very dark and sinister organization. The thing is that these white people, members of this group who can't be mentioned, who have actually gone to great lengths to make sure that whites in general get blamed for the slave trade, the opium trade, and the genocide of the Indians. The funny thing is, these people, even though they basically are white, at least in appearance, don't consider themselves to be white. Alright, I'll go out on a little bit of a limb. I'll say this much. These people call themselves the chosen people. Now, they consider that. You notice the latest, the last Harry Potter movie just came out recently. You notice Harry Potter is called the Chosen One. You notice just before Harry Potter came out, there was the Green Lantern movement came out. There were several references in that movie calling Green Lantern the Chosen One. There's a lot of references in movies into like superhero type characters being called the Chosen One. There are even, because kind of play, one of my vices, I've been involved with some of these computer games, kind of some of these fantasy role-playing games and stuff. A lot of times, a lot of these games, the main character is called the Chosen One. Or sometimes there are a certain group of people who are called the Chosen Race or something like that. That's not a coincidence. These so-called chosen people allegedly own and control Hollywood and a lot of the other rest of the media and other things. I have to say allegedly. You can't say that they do own it. That's hate speech. It's not hate speech when they brag about it in their own publications, but it's hate speech if a non-chosen one mentions it. These so-called chosen people like to think of themselves as being magical, powerful superheroes who are trying to rid the world of evil. And that is the key to their behavior, is they actually think what they're doing is righteous. Basically, killing, torturing, enslaving, punishing us is righteous because they're fighting evil. And the non-chosen people, in their minds, are evil. That's pretty much what they're taught from childhood. And so they've got to punish and kill us and enslave us. Because they're quite vastly outnumbered, their way of enslaving, torturing, and killing us, they have to use a lot of what they call subterfuge. Other people might call deviousness. But whatever you want to call it, whatever you think of them, they're actually pretty damn good at it. I may have said too much already, but we'll see if this gets censored or not. At least I mentioned the chosen people at the end. That's a help.